Welcome back to Wrong Sports, and this is a new video series that I'm going to be doing on this channel all about the most interesting and unbelievable coaching stories in the history of college football. And this next story is about a coach that is quite controversial, especially if you were a fan of an NFL team this guy coached in the 1960s. Yes, that means the Philadelphia Eagles. Then you probably hate this guy, but he's somehow got multiple head coaching jobs in college and the pros over several decades. This is the story of Joe Kuharich and his strange and enigmatic coaching career, and I'm going to mostly be covering his time at Notre Dame in this next Coaches Stories. But before we get into that, make sure as always you subscribe to the channel below. If you aren't already, ring the bell so you get updates on brand new videos. You can also help out the channel on my Patreon. Link is in the description below. You can also check out my podcast there as well. And you can also help out the channel just by simply liking this video or sharing this video and sharing this channel with other college football fans. And since this episode is a sequel of sorts to the Terry Brennan episode I just put out, it is fitting that the man that we will be talking about was born and raised in the college town where this story exploded and kind of went off the rails. Joe Kuharich was born in April of 1917 in South Bend, Indiana, just before America went into World War I. Since he was born and raised not too far from Notre Dame, he and his friends would sneak into games. And one game while he was sneaking in, he was instead found by Newt Rockne, who instead of punishing him, asked Kuharich and his friends to meet him before the games, and Rockne would take him into the stadium himself so that the kids could see the games up close. Kuharich would see many games in the late 1920s as Notre Dame's winning tradition started. That would start his love and loyalty to the school, as after school he would go to Notre Dame, playing under Elmer Layden. Layden would call him one of his best and smartest players he ever had, and even said that Kuharich helped Notre Dame's big comeback in 1935 versus Ohio State. After Notre Dame, Kuharich played in the NFL for the Chicago Cardinals, but his playing time was interrupted by World War II. After the war, though, Kuharich would try to play another year before getting into coaching. He would coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers for 1 year before getting his first head coaching opportunity out west at the University of San Francisco. I have done a whole story on the USF football program, and you can check it out above or in the description below. But Kuharich would have his finest coaching year in 1951, as San Francisco went 9-0, but were shut out of bowl games due to racial reasons. The bowl game may have saved the program, but it wasn't going to save Kuharich, who saw the writing on the wall and left for the NFL again. This time he got a job with the Chicago Cardinals, following the legend Curly Lambeau. Kuharich only lasted a year before he went to Washington, following Lambeau again somehow. He stayed at Washington for 5 years, having a losing record 4 out of 5 years, but the 1 year he didn't have a losing record, which was 1955, he would win the Coach of the Year award. That would bring his name back up in his hometown for the Notre Dame job. Went over in my previous video how Brennan was already being brought up to be replaced after that really bad 1956 Notre Dame football season, but Brennan would somehow survive. After 2 more years, though, the fan base would lose interest in Brennan, and Kuharich's name started to circulate once again. When the job offer was finally given to Kuharich, he accepted it immediately and would come back to South Bend, starting for the 1959 season. When Kuharich got to his alma mater, he changed some things. One of the biggest things was that he brought in his NFL offense and defensive scheme. This scheme proved to be positive in the NFL, but in college, it was just a little too hard for the Notre Dame roster to immediately get the hang of. Along with that, the talent pool of Notre Dame got a little smaller, as Notre Dame's academic standards were raised a few years before Kuharich got there. But even with these handicaps, Kuharich still got the Irish to play well in 1959, as they started with a big win over UNC, and Notre Dame would be ranked in the top 10 after that game. But then they would fall out of the rankings the following week, after a big in-state loss to Purdue. The season would be up and down after that, as they would be blown out one more time and also lose but give number 2 ranked Northwestern and number 19 Georgia Tech some scares during the season. When Thanksgiving came around, the team was 3-5, and they would play 2 more ranked teams on the road to close the season. They first went to Iowa City to play number 16 Iowa, who were on a 3-game winning streak and only gave up 1 touchdown during that streak. Iowa would take a 19-7 lead just before half, but Notre Dame would come back and get a late fourth quarter touchdown to get the big 1-point win. The next week, Notre Dame would maul USC in a cold and windy weather game to win their 5th game of the year and not have a losing season. You'll notice that trend continuing throughout Kuharich's run. But with that late season run in 1959, many were looking forward to 1960, especially some future NFLers that would be on the field. One in particular was their quarterback for this season, who would lead a team to a Super Bowl in a couple of years. His name was Daryle Lamonica. Unfortunately, though, this season didn't go all that well. It started well as they beat Cal at home, but then after that, Notre Dame would suffer for their longest losing streak ever, as they proceeded to lose 8 straight games. What made it worse was that Notre Dame was shut out twice during this streak, and they lost on average by 13 points per game. But it could have been a lot worse, as the defense only gave up over 28 points once, meaning their offense really couldn't do anything. At 1-8 though, Notre Dame would travel to USC, who were kicking off the John McKay era, and Notre Dame would end up beating USC and John McKay 17-0 to at least end one of the worst Notre Dame years with a win over a big rival. Now, after Terry Brennan's disastrous 1956 season, fans and alumni called for his head, but for some reason after this terrible 1960 season, there wasn't the same backlash being put on Kuharich. The talk of wanting him gone might be because Notre Dame would start 3-0 the next season in 1961, as they beat Oklahoma, Purdue, and then shut out USC at home. This was the first time and only time Notre Dame had shut out USC in back-to-back seasons, so that was one of the few positives for Kuharich during his time at Notre Dame. Notre Dame would be ranked number 6 and had to travel to East Lansing to play the number 1 team, Michigan State. Michigan State were not only undefeated, but they hadn't given up a TD in their last 3 games. But in this game, Notre Dame did manage to score a touchdown and hold Michigan State for a while, but would run out of gas as they suffered their first loss 17-7. And even though Notre Dame lost, it wasn't a terrible loss, and they were still ranked in the top 10, but then they would welcome 2 rivals in Northwestern and Navy. First, Northwestern skated by Notre Dame 12-10, and then Navy would do it again to them the next week, winning 13-10. So after Notre Dame started 3-0, they were now 3-3, but the losses were very close, so Notre Dame and Kuharich would still be considered a top team at this point. They would win their next 2 games over Pittsburgh and Syracuse on a last-second field goal to be 5-3 and have to travel for their last 2 games to potentially have a winning season for the first time. First, they played Iowa, who they beat easily last year, but this year was a little different, as Iowa had a more high-powered offense, which managed to score 42 points at Notre Dame and beat them easily. The season finale was on the road at Duke, who were the ACC champions at this point, and Notre Dame once again gave up a bunch of points to them, losing 37-13, and would be 5-5 again for the second time in 3 years. Even though this was a 3-win improvement from the previous year, the last 2 losses by an average of 20 points really sullied a lot of fans for another Kuharich season. But he would be back for season 4, and it would start with rumors that Kuharich was being looked at by the NFL, but nothing concrete would come out about this for another month or so. The season, meanwhile, started with Notre Dame traveling to play number 6 Oklahoma, who ended the previous season on a 5-game winning streak, and that was after an early season loss to Notre Dame. The same thing as last year would happen once again, as Notre Dame would hold on and manage to beat the ranked Oklahoma team and get a big opening season win. But after that big win, things would crumble again like last year. In their second game, which was their first at home, it would have a sold-out crowd to see if Kuharich could grind out some more wins. But instead, these 60,000 fans or so would see Purdue run all over Notre Dame to beat them 24-6. And Notre Dame would then follow that up with 3 more games versus Big Ten teams, and all of them resulting in losses. The 4-game losing streak had Notre Dame's offense not able to score double digits, and the defense gave up an average of 20-plus points per game. Kuharich and Notre Dame were now at 1-4, and the calls for him going away were heightening. But as I mentioned a couple of times, and it's also the title of this video, this guy was a complete enigma, as he managed to coach Notre Dame to 4 straight wins, to get them back to over 500, and they would travel to LA for their final game versus number 1 USC, which could give them their first winning season under Kuharich. This game could maybe save Kuharich for another year or two at Notre Dame, or at least give the fans something to look forward to next season. Instead, though, it was a complete horror show, as USC demolished any Notre Dame offense that they could have and paid them back for the last 2 seasons of shutouts by beating them by a shutout 25-0. Notre Dame would once again finish 5-5, their 3rd time out of the last 4 seasons, but Kuharich's record over those 4 years was 6 games under 500 because of that really bad 1960 season. But even with the losing record, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that Kuharich should resign or that he would resign. Kuharich was very loyal to Notre Dame, as he could have stayed in the NFL coaching since he was well liked in Washington, D.C. by the players and by their owner. But he always wanted to come back and coach at Notre Dame. I mentioned in my previous episode on Coach Terry Brennan and how he was almost fired after his 3rd year, as alumni were suggesting Kuharich to be the coach. Kuharich would not end up taking the Notre Dame job in early 1957, and I'm not sure if Notre Dame never asked him or if Washington had a concrete contract with him that Notre Dame just couldn't break through to hire him. Whatever the reason was, even when he was coaching in the NFL, Kuharich said he wanted to coach his alma mater one day, so his loyalty was clearly there. Even Father Hesburgh, who was still the president at this point at Notre Dame, was going to stick with Kuharich, as he would state publicly, and this was from a Times article in 1960, that Kuharich is not to be measured by any nostalgic calculus of wins, losses, and national championships, but only by the excellence of his coaching and the spirit of his teams. And that is what makes Kuharich's time at Notre Dame even stranger, because the president didn't seem to care as much as he did when Brennan was coaching the team only a handful of years ago, and Brennan was actually winning games under the same academic guidelines as Kuharich was under. Yet Kuharich was losing, but it didn't seem to matter. Kuharich did complain about the talent that Brennan had left him and blamed the losing record on trying to get his system and his players to block and tackle to his offensive style. And he couldn't because Brennan's recruits just didn't have the talent. The only thing was, Kuharich's offensive style was completely different from Brennan, and it confused collegiate players. In addition, the players he recruited were often big, which is good for some positions, but were often clumsy, which made, for example, learning a new blocking scheme even harder to do. The recruitment of bigger players were also a drawback in the defensive back, running back, and end positions, where he favored those bigger players over faster and smaller players. This was seen in the offensive output, where Kuharich's 4 Notre Dame teams never finished in the top 40 in college and never averaged 20 points per game, which his predecessor Brennan did 4 out of 5 seasons. Also, Kuharich seemed to coach Notre Dame games like he was in the NFL, as he would mess up substitutions, and he took too many timeouts a few times. This mostly happened in his first 3 seasons. The most famous thing, though, Kuharich is known for is that his quotes or post-game press conferences never made any sense. He would say famous things like, "The team was a horse from a different fire department," or this famous quote,
"Boy, the gears in that guy's mind didn't mesh for a long time, I'll tell you that."
So maybe his confusing speech tricked the university higher-ups to keep him around a little longer. But the one thing Kuharich could say that he was good at was recruiting. That was finding the talent and also improving the talent once they got to campus. And Kuharich showed that with his great USF Dons team in 1951. But Kuharich, like most coaches, wanted his talent. And like I mentioned already, he complained a lot about the talent Brennan had left him. Kuharich might get a pass on this because his teams did have talent towards the end of his tenure. 2 of his players, like I mentioned, were the Mad Bomber Darryl LaMonica and also Nick Buttaconte, who won Super Bowls in the NFL and is an NFL Hall of Famer. So maybe his recruiting of talent and his talent that it was there was a big reason why he managed to keep his job and really not have anyone question it for so long. The fans and alumni might have had enough, though, of Kuharich halfway through the 4th season he was there, because after that 4-game losing streak in 1962, Notre Dame would have 3 games in a row at home in November. Unlike other games, those 3 home games didn't sell out, which was the first time they didn't sell out more than 1 game in a season. It was clear, though, that fans were protesting by not coming to the stadium or sitting through not only late fall weather in Indiana, but subpar football from a once proud football program. I wanted to explain all that to you because there's not really a concrete reason why Kuharich would leave Notre Dame, as he would resign from the head coaching job in March of 1963. He would take over a position with officiating in the NFL, he was paid more, and he would be able to springboard back as a head coach when he pleased, which he would end up doing the very next year in 1964, as he would be the Philadelphia Eagles coach, and most Eagles fans probably curse him to this day. But since he left in March of 1963, it was a little too late for the school to look for a replacement, and they went back to a familiar face in their freshman coach, Hugh DeVore. DeVore had coached the year of 1945 for the school, and then when war ended, the school would bring back Frank Leahy. DeVore would be named interim head coach for 1963 and would lead the team to a 2-7 record. And this would also lead to Notre Dame hiring Ara Parseghian, who would then bring them to the top and actually give a lot of credit to DeVore for keeping the program on track, and would give a little bit of credit to Kuharich since he managed to recruit the very good 1964 team. But how do you feel about Kuharich's time at Notre Dame, or really just his coaching tenure in general? Because it was very strange. Tell me in the comments below, and of course, if you aren't already, please subscribe to the channel below, ring the bell so you get updates on brand new videos, like and share this video with other college football fans, and of course, help out the channel on my Patreon. Link is in the description below.